In the last few years, have you been at all puzzled or even confronted by seeing he/him, she/her, or they/them in a bio? Has it brought up feelings of perhaps upset or rigidity or even anger in you? Have you found that in recent times, we as a community have ramped up our judgment of people not like you? I can say, for me, absolutely, I have felt such things. And about a decade or so ago, when those slashes started to appear, I found them uncomfortable. For a moment, it was unfamiliar to me. Yet, when I listened to the people who were identifying that way, thankfully, quite quickly, I was able to make sense of it. And I was able to patch these new understandings through to where empathy and curiosity and need for recognition of others, of humanity, are planted in my brain. And those feelings have been growing ever since. Am I perfect at appreciating such things or the sensitivities around them? Absolutely not. As you're about to hear. A few months ago, I was asked to chair a panel at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. It's a talkie fest in Sydney, and it was a big honour, and the panel was extraordinary. That panel included the internationally acclaimed performance artist, author, poet, comedian, and public speaker Alok Vaid-Menon. Their book, Beyond the Gender Binary, is absolutely game-changing. It's a quick read. We'll get through it in a couple of hours, an afternoon. As far as I'm concerned, it should be required reading in high schools. I did a whole podcast a few months back on a Friday about how I accidentally misgendered Alok live on stage. To say they were graceful about it would be an understatement. I'd like to think I'm a kind of person who tries to see the humanity in others, even those that I don't agree with. However, I'm still beholden to automatic associations within my brain thanks to 40-something years of habitual behaviour. And live on stage in front of a few hundred super-duper woke inner West Sydney people, I fucked up. And Alok, bless them, they gave me the space to make that mistake, allowed me to make up for it. They gave me the space to understand that they could see it was all a part of me learning more about the way I myself have been conditioned about the world through my experience of being a white, cisgendered man. Alok has a huge amount to teach us, not only about gender non-conforming people, but also about ourselves and how our own anger, our own fear, our own insecurity can sometimes amplify and even externalize our own fears and insecurities. They are a stunning, brilliant, funny, loving human being to listen to, and I cannot wait for you to get a massive software update into what it is to not only be non-binary, but what we might not realise about how we see the world for those of us who only appreciate things through the lens of the gender that we've always identified with. Alok spoke with me from their apartment in New York City, and I can't wait for you to hear this conversation. It's glorious. This is Alok Vaid-Menon. I'm so grateful to speak with you again today, Alok, and I'm so grateful that you said yes. It's so lovely to speak with you again today. Where in the world are you?
I'm in New York in my apartment.
And how is New York? I mean, I lived in America for 10 years, and in America, in the suburbs, it's like, on around, it's like, there's bits of this place that are pretty weird, but down my street's okay. But the news that travels outside of America is like, everything's on fire and people are shooting each other all the time. So how is it today?
Yeah, I think we're in a state of grief after what's happened in Colorado Springs here a few days ago, and then followed by another shooting in Virginia just a couple of days later. And it feels really hopeless because it feels like the United States of mass shootings at this point.
To be honest, Alok, that was part of the reason why I left. I'd already met Audrey and Georgia. I'd been living there for about 9 years by then. And every week, another unarmed child, 12, 13, 14 years old, going to take their phone out of their pocket was filled full of bullets by cops who then kept their jobs. And about every 2 weeks, another person walked into a shopping centre or a school or a pub and just unloaded an AR-15 that they bought over the counter into strangers. And I don't know, nothing's getting done about this. I just couldn't be with it anymore. And in more recent times, as you mentioned, in Colorado Springs, I can't imagine how it's not a targeted attack on a queer-friendly bar. Someone just walked in there and just murdered people.
It was actually done during Trans Awareness Week on the night before Trans Day of Remembrance, which is when we commemorate all the murders of trans and non-binary people, and 2 trans people were murdered in that shooting on Trans Day of Remembrance. So we have all of the evidence. And, what's hard is that we've been trying to get people to realize these so-called trolls online who are festering in this misinformation about the LGBTQ community, allowing this hate speech to proliferate. This has real-life consequences. But because it's so profitable for the algorithm, because it's so profitable for people with power in this country, they just look away. And so I think what I really struggled with when I got the news is I'm a queer person who does public events with a lot of LGBTQ people all over this country. And so I called my team and I was like, we need to actually think really differently about security to make sure that people can still feel safe being in public with other queer and trans people, especially in places in the South and the Midwest, where there's so much of this misinformation right now.
It's interesting. It's tragic, but it's also interesting in that we first met maybe 3 months ago talking about this exact situation. Talking about we met on speaking on a panel at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, speaking about the role of technology and disruptive technology in rebellion. And there was a conversation about, there's this idea that, online trolls, it's just people in their basements. Don't worry about that. And yet in a month, we've seen someone whose ideas about reality have been distorted so much they kicked in Nancy Pelosi's front door and went her husband with a hammer. And what happened in Colorado Springs. And hopeless is an emotion that I understand. What could possibly be done about this, Alok?
And the sad part is there's so many things that can be done, but they're just not being done because the people who are proposing them don't have power in society, right? So one of the first things that we really need is for social media platforms to take more aggressive and principled stances against misinformation and disinformation online. So what's happening right now is that even though trans people are literally being gunned down, murdered, killed, attacked, and assaulted, the predominant narrative is that we are the ones who are stuffing our ideology down other people's throats, who are offensive and dangerous. So it's not only that the reality is being erased, it's that a new reality is being produced that sends people against the very people who are being targeted, right? And we can track that news stories that are fake about trans people go viral on right-wing social media and then manufacture outrage. And this is part of a larger project of taking people's really legitimate fear and anxiety about economic instability. I think in this country and in this world, a lot of people are worried about how are they going to afford to live? How are they going to afford to have families? You give them a convenient scapegoat and you allow them to exercise their anger on someone who they don't know, right? The creation of the stranger is how we stabilize the status quo. You take all of the pain and grief and you just pinpoint it, like pin the tail on the donkey, on the latest group, and you make people chase after them rather than actually working together to create a more just and equitable society. I think the next thing that we really need to do is we need to actually advance, support, and promote LGBTQ artists, thinkers, leaders, musicians, because still what's happened is that we're pigeonholed into pride. We're pigeonholed into one day a year, and people are deeply uncomfortable about us speaking about our lives in mainstream forums. I can't tell you how many times I've been told, when appearing on TV, you have to dress like this. You have to look this way. It's going to make people uncomfortable. I'm like, okay, why is the agenda still about me changing the way that I look and not society changing its attitudes about how we look? Why is it about me having to pretend to be something I'm not and not about people stop being bigoted? That's what I'm saying principled and public stances. I think the next piece here, the reason I'm saying public so much, is I genuinely do believe the majority of Americans, just like I feel about the majority of Australians, are pro LGBTQ. But the issue is they say that to us in private. They come up to us afterwards and they'll say, my uncle was gay. I totally understand what you guys are going through. And I'm like, where is that at the dinner table?
Yeah.
Where's that energy when you're showing up in your job? Like, we need you all to be as public as we are and your support to make homophobia and transphobia obsolete.
I always come back to that line from The Incredibles, like, if everyone's super, no one is. Like, if it's not a big deal, it's not a big deal. It's like, well, whatever. Are you a good person? That's what matters.
Right.
And it's interesting what you say about people come up in private. Oh yeah, my uncle. Look, in the words of Chris Rock, I think Chris Rock, everyone's got at least a gay uncle. At least,
right?
It just,
and now everyone's got a non-binaries like nibbling. Like we're out here too.
without a doubt, and it's it is you can't be what you can't see, and it's visibility. Sometimes it needs to be legislated. Sometimes inclusion needs to be legislated as far as broadcast media is concerned, and sometimes it's like, come on. Let's pick our game up a bit. You did mention when you were processing what happened to you in Melbourne, when you were quite brutally attacked on a tram. When I read about how you talked about it, the amount of empathy and compassion you had for the person that attacked you in public just was gobsmacking, Alok. And it was the most compassionate and selfless way to look at this person as also a victim. And you described that this man who attacked you was also processing grief. And I'm wondering if you could maybe speak about that, this idea that some of the stuff that's coming, people's vociferous objection to anything that isn't the same or like they remember it, is actually them externalizing an anger or a grief in themselves.
Yeah, totally. Powerful people are not people who resort to violence. Powerful people have a quiet and unshakable sense of dignity and security that doesn't require violence. Actually, the people who pretend to be powerful continually tell on themselves. And what discrimination, prejudice, and bigotry is telling on yourself that you have not done the internal work to accept yourself. It's telling on yourself that you think that love is conditional, that you grew up in a family that made you feel like you had to act a certain way and be a certain way in order to get access to love. And it's easier to demonize other people than it is to confront the fact that the people who said that they loved you tried their best to destroy you and called it love. You're telling on yourself that you're heartbroken, and you're telling on yourself that you've not done the work to actually go internal. Powerful people go internal before they go external. They think before they speak. They think before they act. So what I understand is happening right now in all communities, not just my own, is a crisis of mental health. That's where all of this begins for me. Every single political issue begins with mental health. If people felt resolute in themselves, felt okay in themselves, they don't care about what other people are doing with their lives, with their bodies. It's literally, it's not of a concern to you. And I know this because I've spent a lot of time in therapy. I've done a lot of healing work. And the more that I learn to accept myself, the less I judge other people. I truly understand that being on earth is really hard. And each person is just trying their best. And I wish them love and light in their journey. I have no need for other people to become some character in my fiction. And that's what's happening across the board, is that I'm made into a villain for other people to feel sacred, because they can't feel sacred without making me into a villain. And so I just really found compassion for that man in Australia and for all of these people. in my comment sections, for all these people who are deeply upset and believe in misinformation about my community, because I understand that it is easier to believe that trans people are the threat than it is to name that you're heartbroken. Because I think actually there are very few spaces in this culture to be unhappy. And especially if you're a man, you're expected at every single moment to be the inspirational force for other people, to be strong for other people, to create the capacity for other people to be well. But no one's asking you how you're doing or how you're processing the grief of losing so much of who you thought you were, the grief of becoming a dad and then looking at your kid and being like, my dad wasn't there. No one speaks about that. And there's so much pain there. So rather than judging people for violence, what I want to do is create a world that makes violence obsolete by creating places for people to be honest and vulnerable about what they're actually going through.
You bring up something that is so close to my heart. We have two kids. One, the eldest, she's nearly 19, delightful, powerful young woman, and our youngest, who's just 3 and a bit. And the way I look at it, it's like, yeah, he's probably straight, but who knows? He's just figured out how to wink. So he's winking with one eye at the lady daycare teachers when he's being cheeky. I'm like, meh, okay, we'll see how it goes. Whatever he grows into, I will not matter. I will love the man so much. But part of me, nobody wants their son to grow up and punch a person on the tram. Nobody wants their son to grow up and be violent towards their partner, their male partner, their female partner. Nobody wants their little boy at the age of 19 to get locked up because he hit someone or, did something horrible. To try to protect this gorgeous little child from this trap of masculinity that funnels men into this rigid binary thinking is such a challenge. I'm really quite afraid of it, Alok.
I'm afraid of it too. And I think the only way to actually confront fear is to name it. We have to say, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Like what my friends do is we all say, hey, before we want to have kids, we want to actually do enough therapy because we're afraid that we're going to do the same thing that our parents did to us, to them. And people always look at us like, what are you talking about? Like, you're a different person. Like, no, I think actually you have to be able to name that like, hey, this is the reality. We look at the world. Because I think what's happening is that not only are we in the United States of mass shooting, we're in the United States of denial. No one can actually notice what's actually happening in this earth because they're in the story of it. So they were taught and spoon-fed the story that the future was going to be a given. That's no longer a given for us. We were taught that there would be a certain degree of safety and security. That's not given. In an increasingly vexed and fraught world, all of those narratives are disintegrating. And the only way forward is to be honest that we have no idea what's going on. And I think that's what's really hard for me around the gender conversation, is that what I see people basically expressing is, without the gender binary, without there being static definitions of man or woman, how are we going to know how to relate to each other? And then what happens is panic. What I want to say is, what a beautiful question. Let's figure it out together. That actually, as an artist, what I've learned in my life is that the unknown is not the zone where the worst things in the world happen. Most of the time, it's actually where we create and craft the most magnificent ideas and ways of relating than ever before. So this is why I feel called as an artist now to actually say, express your fear of the unknown. Express, and let me teach you how to get curious with the unknown. Let artists enter the chat and show you the methods that we've developed for centuries to talk within ourselves when we're writing something and being like, I don't really know if this is going to land well. We have strategies here. Every day when I'm writing, I have to confront the worst shit in myself. I write it down and I'm like, is that in me? And I've learned to not judge it. I think that's a skill that you learn as an artist, is you have to recognize that there's an entire universe inside of you. This is a long-winded way of saying, we just had an election here. And I keep wondering, what if we put the same faith we do in our elected officials and our artists? Why do we keep on looking at policy as a way for a pathway forward and not at poetry? I really feel like artists are actually the architects of the future.
We were speaking about parenting before, and I know in your story, there was an aunt who was quite influential with your parents. We spoke about parents passing things on to their kids unknowingly, and anyone listening, if you've ever heard your child, your son, your daughter, your child say something that your grandparents used to say, that is evidence that you have repeated something and they're just mirroring you, and the patterns just keep repeating. It's called rippling. That's the word for it. And you're absolutely right. And like, it's our responsibility to process that so we can stop some of the bad stuff from passing on. The stuff that, oh, that was fine in the 40s. Well, it's not now.
Right.
You know, there was
Right.
there was an aunt in your life who was very influential around your parents, and from the way you describe it, did a bit of legwork before you even came along to make sure that your childhood was actually pretty awesome.
Yeah, totally. I feel like I had one of the most precious luxuries in the world that many young people don't have, which is true unconditional love. I had a lesbian aunt who taught me that I could disagree with authoritative figures, who taught me that I could express my unique point of view, who taught me that women were powerful. And so from a young age, I was actually getting this reverse messaging from all the toxicity I was picking up in a small town in Texas. And I had a portal to another possibility. What she taught me is that the status quo is not given, it's produced, and that reality is an ongoing construction project, and I too hold the tools. So that when I went to university, my first year, I would disagree with my professors. I would ask to go to office hours and say, I don't really, this doesn't make sense to me. Can you re-explain it? And my peers would look at me like, how can you do that? Like, they're an expert. And I was like, what does that mean? They have to continually prove their expertise. That I was taught to question power. And now that she died a few months ago, you see with so much more clarity, oh, that's where that came from, you know? I think when people are alive, you kind of are spending your entire MO being like, we're different people, I'm charting my own path. And then death gives us clarity. I mean, Kafka says, life has meaning because we die. And I think about that quote a lot because life would not have any meaning unless we didn't know that it had an expiration date. And there's something extremely clarifying about death. And what my aunt's death really clarified for me is that I've spent so much of my life speaking about the ways that I was marginalized, but also I need to become bilingual in the ways in which I was loved, that actually I have this invisible foundational power as a young person, which is the ability to speak my mind. And when I see so many of these quote unquote trolls in my comment sections, it's an indication to me, I think these people were punished for speaking their mind. I think these people actually were brutalized for having an opinion that went different from their families. And when you're a young person, your parents are God figures. And when I had someone saying, you get to question your God figure, that is so loving and beautiful and powerful. And so I've been sort of saying on tour, I want to be the auntie that she was to me, to the world. I'm going to bring that kind of love that actually encourages disagreement, that actually says, outgrow me. Because I think that the love most people grow up with is, let's make a mini me. Let's like create a 2.0, or let's make you fulfill all the unrealized dreams that I had in my life.
That's the one.
Yikes.
That's the one that pushes kids into football they don't want to play and dance classes they don't want to do. That's the I don't want to learn Krav Maga, Dad. The idea of questioning your professor at Stanford. I'm of a generation, I'm 48 when we're recording this. I'm of a generation that it's disrespectful to question a professor. Talk to us about, if you will, questioning authority doesn't mean I don't have disrespect for authority, does it?
I actually think questioning is the ultimate and highest form of respect. That's why I'm proud to be an American, because there's a tradition of dissent within this country. That actually the Americans I'm most proud of are civil rights activists and feminist activists and gay activists who said, I'm critiquing this country precisely because I love it. This idea that love is beyond reproach or love is beyond critique is actually power. That's not love. True love is communicative, is porous, is interdependent, is dialoguing. And that's what I firmly believe in the world, is I want people to question me. My ideas are not beyond the integrity of critique. In fact, if I was to say that I had created the perfect solution for the world, I would hope that people would come in and say, what what greed, what avarice, what hubris makes you think that? Actually, critique is a form of collaboration. And that's why I think about what poet Amanda Gorman says when she calls America a rough draft. And I would elaborate to say our life is a rough draft, which means that we're continually revising it. And as a poet, an editor is so helpful to me because I might have an idea and no one else understands that. But when you have a good editor, be like, hey, I see what you're trying to do here. I think it could be done a little bit better. And it makes a stronger finished product. So that's what I'm saying when I'm saying challenge authority. You challenge it because you love it and because you're committed to something being magnificent, not just the status quo.
We have bumper stickers here in Australia that, unfortunately, or fortunately, they say Australia, love it or leave. And the idea that we have, as I'm sure you are aware, you've come to this country many times, a horrific history with our First Nations people. Sovereignty was never ceded. We get up in arms about Russia invading Ukraine, and yet we don't say anything about the lands or the people that we live on right now that would never, nothing happened. It was just, we'll take your land and we'll destroy your culture. It was not great. And the idea that one could question that publicly is like, well, if you don't love Australia, fuck off. It's like, no, I'm questioning it because I love Australia. I'm questioning the way we do things because I love this country with all of my heart. And I honestly, Alok, I would give my life for this country. That is how much I love this place. And because of that, I'm like, but not everything is this way for me, for everybody. I want everyone in my country to feel this way. This idea that if you question the ultimate story for me is the state, the nation state. It's just a story. Mm-hmm. When you fly over it, you can't see a line. You look at it from space, there's no borders. Everything's a story. But if you question that, somehow you are denying you then have to leave. It's beyond question. And that's a tricky trap, isn't it?
Yeah. It's so insecure. Like, once again, when I'm trying to say that powerful people are not the people who we might think of as powerful, we have to recognize that often there's a huge insecurity that underlies every supremacy. Because behind white supremacy, behind male supremacy, is a perpetual fear of losing it. So in order to stave off that fear, there's an overcompensation that happens. You cannot question anything. Actually, we should. And if your ideology is so fragile that it cannot be questioned or interrogated, and if that's seen as a form of heresy, that's a real problem, right? I encounter this all the time with when people say, well, biologically, there's just males and females. Facts are not feelings, which I've always thought to be so funny because the truth is feelings are biological. Feelings actually are perceived by our nervous system, which is part of our biology, and the mind-body distinction is false. So actually, stress, psychological stress, can manifest as physical illness in the body. So you're already, once again, telling on yourself. You're repeating a mantra that you've been told without actually understanding what biology actually is or what science actually is. You're committed to the story of science and the story of biology as a way to justify the status quo. So what I often have to do is say, who taught you that being critical is something bad? And then trace that wound. And it always goes back to a family system. That's what I'm always trying to get people to realize is It's very simple here. We can make it about big words, big ideologies, big languages, but it actually boils down to when you feel critiqued, you're 5 years old. And it's some person that you look up to telling you that you're not good enough. And that's what's being activated now. That actually that triggered self exists within you now and it's being activated and I can see it. What is that? I've always thought this was a parallel trigger of a gun and trigger of an emotion and trigger of a neuron. Those things are the throughway. What causes people to get to the point where they commit murder is a psychological trigger that comes from a deeper place. And so that's where we have to really begin this difficult and arduous work of humanizing people. What I do when I see Donald Trump tweeting is I imagine his trauma as a kid. I imagine how difficult it must have been for him to feel love, how he felt like he had to monopolize the entire world like it was one big board game in order to get his dad to notice him. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's awful. I feel so bad for you. You're a wounded child.
That is a fantastic thing to keep with you. And it's, for me, I would love to think that more often than have reacting to the stuff I read about that person. And then now I've got this awful feeling in my body. It's like, now I've got it all over me, buddy. You know, and sometimes if I'm not careful, I can carry that through my day. And it's horrible, you know, but to instead have this compassion and this empathy for this man, who, if you do know his story exactly, I don't think it's a stretch. What you've just described is pretty much what happened. And yet so many people find affinity with this person. But he's not alone. That person exists in many communities in our world, this kind of strongman, othering white guy, because it's easy to communicate in a soundbite, isn't it? It's easy to go, you know, in Australians love a 3-word slogan: stop the boats, build the wall. It's easy to make a 3-word thing. It fits on a bumper sticker, easy to chant. They love it.
But life isn't easy.
That's not really. 3 words, nice.
Okay, yeah, call me there. That's what's excited to have this conversation with you. Is I was thinking about how you had read my book and you felt like it resonated with your experiences. And what I really am frustrated by right now is that a lot of this work around gender is just seen as like a minority interest for a small group of non-binary people. Gender's working for everyone else. And I'm like, hey, everyone, this is because we've foregrounded an inaccurate understanding of privilege that doesn't take into account trauma and emotion. Even people with structural power in society still experience loneliness and trauma. And in fact, even if you're a straight cis white dude in this culture, you still feel like you're never enough, because you have to aspire towards these impossible norms that were created to make you feel like you were not enough, so that you would overcompensate with violence. So you've been duped as well into thinking that there's going to be a finish line, but there's no finish line to toxic masculinity. You can literally dominate the entire world and still not get the security that you seek. And so what I've really tried to introduce in my own work is a different talking point that doesn't say you have privilege, I don't. That doesn't say you're the oppressor, I'm the victim. But that actually says all of us are oppressed by these made up stories, and it looks different for each one of us. It might look like you not being able to cry, and it looks like me getting assaulted on a train, but the origin of that is the same.
When I read your book, Beyond the Gender Binary, which is, the first thing I said to you was like, I wish that was like required reading in schools. I learned what I learned about the world through the lens of the world that I lived in. Really, the only women in my life was my mum and my accounting teacher. I went to an all-boys school, Christian Brothers, which there's barely any of them that exist anymore, perhaps because of some things that have happened. And Nick Cody, a comedian mate of mine, he says, there's a problem with your school when I'm just going to make up a name now, when, you know, the Brother Johnson building, and you go back to school and now it's Block D. You're like, ooh, some shit went down. Something bad has happened there. There was a bit of that. And I got spat out of that at 17. And as far as I was concerned, that was the world. And it was a reflection of this homophobic, misogynist way of looking at things. And then I walked out, basically, and I got my first kind of job in the world, and I realized, wow, people are angry at me a lot. That person's really upset at me. What's going on? Yeah, don't you know? Blah, 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 blah. This shit would come out of my mouth a lot. And boy, did I have to do some learning. And it was hard. It's hard to talk about. It's hard to admit that that's what happened. But to know that, you know, I graduated in a class of 186, all right? So there's 185 other people. And there were at least 6 of them have come out since then, probably way more. Like, and I think about the other guys I went to school with, like, God damn, like every day going to school, living with that as a teenager. And then, like, there I am. Now I'm in the world, in the workplace, just being this fuckwit. And thankfully, some very kind people took me by the hand and went, mate, that's not okay. And I just wish that your book was more available and that kind of thinking was more available, because it was just such a shitty way of looking at the world. But that's what that's all I believed at the time. And it's really
And it hurts
hard.
you too. That's where I feel like, I'm really excited because I was invited to give my first church sermon on Sunday for Trans Day of Remembrance. And I was like, yeah, I've been meaning to do this forever. And so I stayed up all night writing this speech. And one of the things that I say in the sermon is I'm supposed to come up here and detail the ways that transphobia has impacted my life. But I actually want to flip the script. I don't need to prove my humanity to you. You need to prove your humanity to me. How has transphobia impacted your life? How has it eclipsed your sense of possibility? How have these ideas of gender made you into a meager expression of yourself when you deserve magnificence? And what was so powerful about writing that for me is that I no longer want to indulge the lie. The lie that's told for hundreds of years. There's a PR strategy that says that those of us who disobey gender norms are freaks, that we're people who are going to be left alone. I mean, that's the first thing that people will comment. Your dad must have really hated you or something, or like, you're the byproduct of bad parenting. I'm sitting there like, actually, I have the most stable, beautiful, emotional relationships with everyone in my family, with everyone in my life, because they're rooted in honesty and truth. That's what makes good relationships, honesty and truth, not roles. Because what roles do is we default into, well, I as a dad, I as a husband. No, what about you as a person? Like, interrupt the role that you're supposed to be and become a person. That's what transphobia does to cis people, is it makes cis people have to pretend to be man and woman, when in fact you're a broken heart 5-year-old kid who can't like build muscle mass and feels insecure. Like, be honest about your own biography. And it restricts us and depletes us of individuality.
Yeah.
And that's what gender norms do, is they lump billions of different people and tell y'all that you all have to be the same. And you don't.
I love that just the tiniest little bit of Texan just came out of you just then. You used the word y'all in context, and I'm just thrilled that it happened. What
I reckon people get so confused when I tell them I'm from a small town in Texas, but it can come out whenever it needs to. We've got a lot of commonalities there with the Australian audience.
When I was in America, I looked around one day and I realized all my best mates are from Texas. And
there you go.
Just something about Texas.
We were the ones who would have on our bumper stickers, if you don't like it here, leave too.
Oh, yeah.
So we have that in common.
But there was just something about Texans. I just adored them, the way they looked at the world. Is a very similar to Australia, and it's an amazing place. Oh my God, it's an incredible place to go. When you talk about, what is the gender binary doing, or what is, homophobia and transphobia doing to you? I think about, certainly. You don't even have to look back very far. It probably even happens right now. How many grown adults, parents, mothers and fathers, lost a child while they were still alive because in their brain they were like, oh, if you're not cis, not heteronormative, I'm kicking you out and I'm never talking to you again. And at the age of 18, their kids could have lived long and fruitful lives and they've never known them. And then carrying that heartbreak, because somewhere someone said, if your son or daughter is anywhere outside of these lines, they can't live in your house. You cannot be in contact with them. It's over. Oh my God. Can you imagine carrying that? And there's probably men and women alive right now who still carry that. It's horrible to think about. Do you think as a community we're kind of getting better at recognizing the way children are as they are and allowing them to be as they came out? No pun intended.
I think it's the best and the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, people who care, yes, are getting better and supportive and amazing. And I have the opportunity to connect with parents of trans kids all over. And they're just, that heals me to meet parents who come to my shows and say, I'm trying to be a better parent for my kid. Thank you. I'm trying to learn as much information as possible so I can show up. I mean, I never thought that I would ever see any parent say that in public, connect with other parents of trans kids, say, hey, we don't want to process our fears with our kids, so we're going to be in conversation with each other and we're going to skill share on how to talk to schools or how to have difficult conversations with family members. Like, that makes me so happy. And in the US right now, most of the anti-trans laws are targeting trans young people, and they're being pushed by parents who are basically saying these kids are making it up. They want to be a dinosaur one day. How can we trust them? So therefore, we should ban trans kids from sports, which actually, like, they're like 12. So all that money that you could have spent, coming up with a comprehensive plan around housing evictions is now being spent to ban 12 trans intramural sports adolescent athletes. Thank you so much. And then two, they're saying we have to ban trans kids from using the facilities of their choice at schools. We need to ban curriculum about LGBTQ content in schools. My own book banned in many public schools across this country. That we need to actually punish and penalize teachers for having rainbow flags in their classroom or any support of the LGBTQ community. So we're seeing the worst of the worst there as well. And so what I find to be so painful is knowing that there's so many queer and trans kids who just happen to be born into the wrong families, and that will ruin them for the rest of their lives. Because as a recurring theme in this conversation, childhood trauma manifests as trauma for the rest of your life because your brain is still developing. And so it just makes me so sad that we haven't developed a better way to do this, where it's just like you just happen to be born in a family that doesn't see your specialness, and then for the rest of your life, you're going to have to carry that baggage of having to deal with other people's unprocessed grief and shame. It's just awful. And I just feel like I grew up being bullied by my peers, but not by my politicians. And what we've seen over the past few years is a bunch of extremely wealthy adults bully trans kids. And that's just unforgivable to me. I mean, I was just at a rally in Texas where the governor has defined supporting your trans kid as a form of child abuse. And so we had a rally outside of the governor's mansion saying this is not okay. And what was so cool about the organizers there in Texas is they knew they didn't want to expose the kids to any harm or violence. So they just had audio recordings that we'd play on the microphones. And it's these 12, 13-year-old kids being like, I just want to go to school. I just want to play. I want to hang out with my friends. And I have to be here begging for my humanity. I'm afraid of being taken away from my own parents, because that's another law that they're trying to do, is to separate trans kids from their parents under the premise of child abuse. And who showed up to the march but conservative counter-protesters in an armed tank, an actual armed tank, at a rally in support of love and support for families of trans kids. That's where we're at in this country.
Okay, so it's legal to drive around an armed tank as a civilian?
Welcome to Texas. Welcome to Texas.
Part of me just then flashed in my head, I don't know how many people listening will know this, but it's quite a famous story. The whole Second Amendment gun rights thing came out of the Black Panther Party. Essentially, it's in the Second Amendment. I've got a right to bear arms. It was, a bunch of African American people standing there with shotguns defending their community from the cops who had been essentially killing their brothers and their children. And they're like, nope, you look it up. It's in the Constitution. It's my right to hold this weapon. And so it was the Black Panther Party that first started doing that. And then now it's kind of flipped. And part of me was just like, well, what if a rainbow tank showed up? What if it was Alok standing there with an AR-15? But then that's like, well, what the fuck is that?
Except
then everyone's shooting each other to pieces.
Shoots love poems.
Yeah.
And the gun shoots love poems, and it teaches people about peace, and it shows that violence is not ever the solution.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's what I'm saying about we have to meet it with a different frequency.
Yeah.
We have to meet it with a different frequency. Yeah. We have to actually humanize the people who dehumanize us. We have to choose love and compassion, even when it's hard, because that's the only way that we win. I'm not saying any of this because I want to be the better person. It's because I've seen it work in my own life. Look, I grew up extremely homophobic and transphobic to myself. Wow. That's with having a lesbian aunt. That's with having supportive families. I grew up in a public school in Texas being told that gay people should be put on an island separate from everyone else, where they'd all contract AIDS, and then we'd have a gladiator-style battle so they could murder themselves off. That was just casual conversation with my peers. So, of course, I imbibed that. So when I figured out that I was queer, I thought that this world would be better off if I deleted myself, if I muzzled and muted myself. And so I went from that self-hatred to this. How did I get there? Not through shaming myself, not through saying that I was a horrible person, but through loving myself, saying, of course you believe these things because you were adjacent to so much toxicity. The way that we change people's minds is that we love them more than they could hate us.
When you said this, I'm not going to lie, Alok, a little tear came into my eye. I want to describe how I first met you, what you were wearing. It was, I don't know, probably 3 meters long. Behind you, there was this train, and it was just this beautiful gold embroidered. I don't know if it was a half toga. I don't know what it was. It was off the shoulder.
It was a curtain. It was a curtain.
Fuck you. It was a fucking
I was wearing
curtain.
Drapery from a curtain, yes.
You literally walked like, I was like, your mother's drapes? Fuck it is. Fucking oath it is. And I'm going to stand here on stage in front of hundreds of people. And you just strode on stage, just wearing this incredible thing. And I looked at you and I was
literally was like covering the entire stage, like a carpet on the entire stage, my gown.
You looked so fucking fabulous. And I think about it now, I was like, I've never felt that comfortable in myself to stand on stage wearing something like that and feeling, and I just was like, God damn, man, I was so jealous in that moment. It's not envy. It's like, what have I missed out on, like, by not allowing myself to be as expressive about who I am in that point. And the way that I see myself, and I'm just like, God, please let more people see you being completely comfortable expressing you are the way you are visually. It's so pure and so authentic, and I love that it was actually a curtain, man. It's so much fun.
It's so much fun. When I spoke to the designer and they're like, "Hey, so we have like a curtain," I was like, "This is so fun. Let's do it." I just literally, this is the thing. Part of the childhood trauma thing is that we learn that play is immature and that we have to grow up and become super serious. And it's like, in order to be taken seriously, you have to look a certain way and act a certain way and speak. I say, absolutely not. Have fun all the time. Once again, life has meaning because we die. Are you going to be sitting there at the end of your life with remorse and regret that there were things that you could have said, loves that you could have had, colors you could have worn, outfits you could have decorated this beautiful planet with, but you didn't because what? None of that makes sense when you're dying and you look at the clarity of your world. You're like, really? I cared what people would thought? What matters at the end of your life is what you thought about yourself. And so that's what I remind myself every day. I don't really care if people like what I'm wearing. I don't do this for them. I do it to express my creativity and to have fun.
I love that it was, because I looked down at my wife. She was in the front row and she was just like, her jaw was on the floor, and it was all we talked about on my home. Did you see what they were wearing? Fuck, it was great. Now, sorry, to backtrack for just a second here, because you did mention something that I would like you to speak about. You talked about deleting yourself and muting yourself, and the most extreme form of that is making that a permanent situation, and non-binary, non-gender binary people or non-binary people are at such colossally exaggerated risk of self-harm or dying by self-harm. It's frightful once you see, once you go, well, that's just how they came out. This is just who this person is. That's how they arrived on this earth. And B, oh my goodness, they're now at risk. There's a mate of mine, let's call him John. Hey, John, I haven't seen you in a while, been away. How's the boys? And he goes, oh, I didn't tell you. You didn't tell me what? We haven't spoken for about nothing. We go, yeah. So I now have one son and one daughter. Okay. And the younger child I'd known for a couple of years. And this John said to me, he just straight away, he just quoted the facts. He goes, facts are that trans kids have this much higher risk of self-harm, but also dying by self-harm. And I'd rather have an alive child. So whatever this person needs is what they're going to get. And in a blink, my eyes were like, well, of course. But not everyone sees it that way, do they?
Yeah, and they have the audacity, In the US, the statistic used to be, it's changed, that 41% of trans and non-binary people had attempted suicide. And so people would comment on photos of me and say 41%.
Oh my God.
So they'll actually goad and bully us. And it goes under the idea that they think that we're dying by suicide because we're disorderly and we are defective, not that it's because we're discriminated against, not because we can't exist in public without people laughing at us or throwing trash at us. Imagine the kind of strength it takes for gender nonconforming people to exist in public space as we do, knowing that thousands of people are going to be displacing their own self-hatred onto us, telling us that this world would be better without us. I have so much sympathy with all trans and gender nonconforming people who are struggling with thoughts of self-harm or practices of self-harm, because it makes sense when that's what the world is telling you. It's not because we have a disorder, it's because we're discriminated against. But what I've learned in my life is that I can't seek validation at all from society. It has to be within. And so what I've learned how to do now is just walking down the streets of New York, people, of course, are going to say things about me. I don't care. I genuinely don't care, because the truth is, what's the alternative? The alternative is that I tone it down and then I'm unhappy, because then I have to live a lie, and I'd rather live in my truth. And there's nothing more beautiful to me about my truth. It's taken me a long time to get here, but that's what I'm saying. Transformation is possible. How could I go from not allowing any video or audio recordings of myself because I was afraid that my voice was too feminine, to appearing in a couture curtain on a stage in front of hundreds of people and not even blinking? And I mean, yes, blinking because I wanted to show off my eyelashes, but
let's not even talk. There was a lot of glitter going on. It was good.
Thank you. The story of that is a story of hope.
Yeah.
It's a story of redemption, and it's a story of transformation. And that's why trans people are being targeted, because the powers that be want to teach you that transformation is impossible, that the status quo has to be permanent. And it's not true. We can live many lives in this one. But the way that we move, the way that we go to our Super Saiyan status, the way that we upgrade, the way that we ascend, is we name our pain. And that's the missing thing. When people are stagnant or feeling in a rut, there's a pain there that's begging to be witnessed. And it looks like crying and metamorphosis. It looks like grief and then healing. That's what it means to be alive, I think people want a pain-free, insulated life. They want things to be easy, the slogans, the genders, the roles, but that's not how we live our lives. Our lives are going to be fraught, complicated, intense. There's going to be so much grief and loss because the people that we love die. And I return to that over and over again. I've lost so many people that I've loved, and every time it feels like the first time. Nothing prepares you for it. No amount of prep work prepares you for someone that you love dying. But then you sit there in that grief and you have such razor sharp clarity. I need to live my life in a way that's a memorial to this person that I love. I need to live my life in a way so that if I can't see the person that I love tomorrow for some reason, I'm not going to have remorse or regret. That's what I'm doing with my own life. I don't want to die as not myself. That thought destabilizes me. And so I remind myself, even if it were to take me down, bitch, I'm fabulous. And I'm going down as me. And that's important for me.
The idea that a grown adult who pays taxes, has a mortgage, could feel so threatened in their life by a 6-year-old child called John, who leaves grade 2, goes on vacation, goes on summer holidays, and then comes back in grade 3 as Jenny, wearing a different uniform, that a grown person can be so terrified that they would, wish death upon that child. You talked earlier about questioning yourself and questioning what comes from, that you're really going to have to take a long, hard look at the mirror. That's a confronting thing, to understand that you wish destruction of this child because it makes you feel weird inside. That's going to be hard for that person to even get towards. What's a step that someone can take to even begin to get there?
Therapy is the first step for all. And then the next step is to really understand that anger is the bodyguard to sadness. The reason people default to rage and indignation is because those are easier access points, especially for men, than pain. So many men express anger because it's the only emotion that y'all have been allowed to express. When actually you don't need to go to anger, you need to go to crying first. That's the human emotion there, right? And so when I see all this anger, I'm always asking, What is that hiding? What pain is there? James Baldwin, who is my favorite orator, thinker, writer, said that people cling on so stubbornly to their hatred because without it, they'd have to confront their pain. And that's the lie that is told over and over again.
Yeah.
You hate me because you hate yourself. I love you because I love myself.
That is, it's extraordinary to say it in 2 sentences, Alok. Yet to even get to the point where you can accept that idea and then see if you can apply it to yourself, it's very hard. Even just to get to the idea of like, oh, my feelings aren't facts, or what, I can change my mind, I can feel differently about something. Oh, just because I feel angry about that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. Like, for some people go through their whole life never questioning their initial thoughts, and that's but then all you're doing is you're just reacting. You never you have no free will. You've got no choice. You have no opportunity, no choice at all to ever be different, and then you're stuck in pain and anger, which is no fun. And then you get ulcerative colitis and all kinds of horrible stress-related diseases that you spoke about earlier because you're carrying this pain. And how much fucking time are you wasting being upset at a stranger's child?
Wasted time. And that's what I really want to say. I mean, the theme of this podcast is you're telling on yourself.
Yeah.
You mean to tell me that you could spend your day having picnics, learning new hobbies, picking up new languages, beating video game quests, and you're going to spend hours sending negative comments to people you don't even know? What that shows me is you don't think that your life is worth levity. You were taught that you have to be in fight or flight in order to be. And when actually offered freedom, rest, leisure, equality, you will sabotage all efforts because you don't know who you are when you're at peace with yourself. And that shows that there's healing to be done there. And that's why every time people come at me, I say, who hurt you? And they're so floored and destabilized by that because I won't even indulge it. This has nothing to do with me. Your projection is not my reality. I'm a mirror to some part of yourself that you have not integrated and accepted. Because some of my best friends are white, cis, straight dudes, and they're totally comfortable with me because they've done that work to choose those identities for themselves, to choose being a man for themselves. That's what I'm fighting for. You get to be a man, but make that choice yourself. You're not a man because your parents told you should be, because the doctors told you should be. You're a man because you are defining what man means to you. Not there's some guidebook that's been passed down across generations on how to be something that you should be, not actually checking on what you want to be.
Alok, tell me how this approach of having empathy for a person who's writing horrible things online, tell me how this approach differs to essentially cancelling and going, okay, that's it. You have to then be deplatformed where you're not allowed to ever have a social media account ever again.
Yeah, I just believe in redemption. I've changed so much in my life. I'm constantly changing. I mean, through this conversation, I'm changed. That's what it means to be a lucid person, is that we're constantly growing and expanding. And so I believe in everyone's capacity to transform. That does not mean that I don't think that there should be repercussions when people breach social protocol. Mm-hmm. But I do believe we have to believe that people are capable of transformation. It's easier to not. It's easier to say they're the good guys, they're the bad guys, they're the villain. But what I want everyone to understand is being non-binary is not just about a refusal of man, woman. It's a refusal of all binaries that are holding us back, including good and bad. Within each of us is evil. Within each of us is the system that we're critiquing. Within each of us is the need to be humbled and corrected. That's where I activate from compassion, is I don't believe that there are bad people and that there are good people. I believe that there are human beings born into a world shrouded with trauma, where we have no literacy about trauma, where the first time we have PTSD diagnosis is after World War II, after Vietnam, even later, with Army vets. And now we're slowly developing the research to show how trauma fundamentally shapes our physiology. I have so much compassion because we don't know how these childhood dynamics map out for the rest of our lives. I get frustrated sometimes because people see compassion as just sort of like Dalai Lama level spiritual evolution, when in fact it's just like rote neurological science. Like it's just like basic, like this is being found in all of the contemporary psychiatric and neurological research, which is that trauma reshapes our brains, and that actually our brains don't differentiate between physical and verbal violence, that actually our brains perceive themselves as under attack, and that activates every single nervous system, which activates all of the parts of our body, which fundamentally shifts the way of our lives. We keep on mistaking people's trauma coping strategies as personalities. And so what I try to do is not indulge in the bluff. Who you are is a trauma coping strategy. Now, give birth to yourself again. Healing is, who do I want to become? How do I reparent myself so that I live with dignity, so that when I die, I say, hey, death, good to see you. I've been waiting for this. Glad you're here. Let's do this. Instead of sitting there or lying there with so much remorse and regret. Yikes. Every time I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, why do I do this, Alok? I know that I am going to have the best death ever. I'm literally going to be so happy because I've lived the fullest life ever. I don't live with regret. I say the things that I want to say. I wear the things I want to wear. I love the people I want to love. I'm having an amazing time. And those are what gender nonconforming people across the generations have done. I'm getting ahead of myself, but one of my favorite mentors is Sylvester, the Queen of Disco, who has a song called You Make Me Feel Mighty Real. People might be
real. Great song.
So Sylvester died of HIV and AIDS. And one of Sylvester's last appearances, they were in a hospital gown at the Gay Liberation Parade in San Francisco with their body decaying. And people were like, Sylvester, what are you doing? And she was cracking jokes. She was cracking jokes, and she makes this joke towards the end of her life where she says, people keep on saying that I'm dead, but you're only going to know that I'm dead when I call you and tell you myself. The ability to joke during mass death, to have so much presence and self-acceptance, to reject other people's shunning of disability and illness at the peak of the AIDS crisis, where people think that you are disposable as a Black, gay, sick person. That is the kind of power that is capable once you accept vulnerability, truth, and self-acceptance in your life.
History recalls that the first punch thrown at the Stonewall riot was a trans woman.
And at Colorado Springs, there was a trans woman who helped get this mass shooter to stop shooting people, who disarmed him and worked in conjunction with a straight Army vet. And I think that that is such a powerful story, that the very communities that y'all are saying are dangerous are the people who demilitarize this guy and save dozens of innocent people's lives.
Exactly. Alok, I'm just so glad you exist in the world. All right. I know that you don't need me to tell you that because you clearly know it. However, in reading your book and then meeting you and speaking with you on stage and speaking with you now, I'm just so grateful that you exist. You can't be what you can't see. All right. And there's children that are yet to be born that will look at the work that you have done and gone, okay, well, I can do that. And parents that look at you and go, okay, we can do that. And for me, that's an incredible gift that you've already given. And I'm also really glad that you think about death a lot. I think about death every day. I think it's extraordinarily important. Memento mori is really, really important. We have to accept that death is coming for every one of us. We don't know when. Could be today. So how are you going to say goodbye to the people you love today? How are you going to hang up the phone? Are you going to sit there and enjoy that sandwich? Because it honestly could be your last. And that makes everything amazing.
We have to live as if everything has the capacity to amaze us. And this is something that actually young people and old people both teach us. You know, my sister just gave birth, so I've been spending a lot of times around this baby. And this baby is so amazed by everything. And I am now getting back into touch with my own amazement. I'm like, why didn't I spend a second looking at the tree and be like, holy shit, it's a tree. That is so cool. And then when you see old people, you realize how much work it goes into the smallest things, like putting a spoon in a mouth. And you're like, I do that every day. I need to sit here and say, it is amazing that I can do this, that the food can enter my mouth and that I can taste. And that's why intergenerational community is the antidote to all of this. All of the ideas that I have are because I've spent so much time with my grandparents when they were dying. And that's something that so many queer and trans kids, once again, don't get to experience. When we're cut out of our families, we're cut out of intergenerational grief ritual, we're cut out of that human need to actually learn from our elders to bestow to the next generation. And that's what's being interrupted right now when they're trying to pass laws in Texas. They're trying to pass a law that will criminalize drag in the state of Texas by saying that if you allow drag to happen, your business is a sexually oriented business. And if there are minors that could at all be in your business, then you'll get fined and penalties. They're defining drag as wearing anything that's not consistent with the gender you're assigned at birth. So all trans people are in drag by the law. So it's part of actually saying that you can't have trans people at all near schools. You can't have trans people at all near any places where children frequent. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, the pain that this is going to cause when we're talking about rippling for generations, because I grew up with a lesbian aunt who introduced me to gay and lesbian adults, and it saved my life. And so I'm really feeling triggered now because I'm like, we need this so badly. We need to know that we're possible.
Thank you so much for spending time with me.
Of
Anything
course.
I can do for you, don't hesitate. I'll shoot you an email about a little podcast setup you might be able to make.
Yeah, I mean, a good one is I always say to my allies, I don't need love and light, I need love and good lighting. So if you could send me some of those links,
Good
that would
lighting.
be great.
Good lighting is the key. I'm like really old, but if I put it right, the shadows are perfect. It's
Incredible. Truly, you are the best Zoom window I've ever seen in my life.
I'm at your service.